Since I was never in a band, that's probably the biggest applause from a punk audience I've ever had. I just wanted to go back to this slide. This was the playlist from earlier, and it was funny because some of the recordings are ones, at least one of them, Cliff Cunningham put up onto SoundCloud. The standbys, I actually recorded off my vinyl and digitized it and put it up on SoundCloud. So we're kind of blending our eras of technology here. So today's going to be a little bit of a tour of the archive, talking about the project itself, and also just giving you an idea of some of the interesting ways that we can look at that scene. Because for some of us, it was our youth, and we have our personal stories about it. But then other people could also look at the same material and see another view of San Diego. So it can absolutely be part of the history of the city as a whole. And it's not really linear. We're going to dip in and out of different times and stuff like that. But I think you'll enjoy it, and I hope by the end of it you'll be inspired to help me grow the archive and really make this happen. And this sort of fest that we're planning for April is, I think, a pretty exciting step in the acknowledgement of this scene and how important it was in San Diego, and how it's still affecting the creative world of San Diego. So what makes San Diego unique in all of the sort of cultural things that happen in town, and in terms of this too, for music, like, well, how is it different from LA? It's this intersection of beach culture, military culture, and Mexico's culture all blending together. And in punk, you would see all of these things mixed up. And I think that's what really makes that it's a way to look at San Diego. Because one of the nicknames for San Diego was Slow Death, because we just felt like there was nothing going on. So it kind of pulls the view out from the personal experience and you might see it a little bit differently. And I also want to say that, I call this a punk archive, and at the time, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was really a mixture of musical styles that we would kind of call that, and people influenced by that started making post-punk and other kinds of music, and there wasn't such hard divisions. So younger folks might think, oh, well, punk has to be hardcore, or it has to be something very specific. And so I just put this up as like a look. This is what we actually are including, all these different kinds of music, and people were going to see each other's bands, and different styles of bands were playing together on the same bills. So it might be a little broader than some people are expecting. At the heart of punk is this do-it-yourself ethic, and this idea from music. So music was at the center of that, so for a lot of us, that was sort of the opening to a lot of other creative things that were happening. But it was the music that started that. But clothing was a big deal. Hair was a big deal. You'll see in a lot of the early zines, who are all the advertisers? They're hairstylists. I noticed we're doing all the ads in all the zines. Politics, this idea of mutual aid, right? People helping each other out. So one of the things about this archive is punk was the inspiration, the music was the inspiration, and the start of it was my flyer collection. So, but you'll see that there's all these other things that hook into that as well, that round that out. So everyone has a punk origin story. What got you into punk? Mine's kind of funny. So in 1977, so my dad was an orchestra conductor. We came out to San Diego when UCSD was started, and he was in the music department there, and did a lot of contemporary music. And so dissonant sounds were not unusual. But my oldest brother gave my dad the Sex Pistols album as a gag gift for Christmas in 1977. And so they dutifully put it on for a minute and then went, okay, that's enough of that. And so I grabbed that record. Little did they know what would happen. I kind of came from soul music, so I actually couldn't listen to the whole record all the way through either, but I was completely mesmerized. And then when they started touring, I actually really literally, so that's me in 77, and I asked my dad I wanted to go to San Francisco and see the Sex Pistols. My dad was like, no, we're not taking you to San Francisco to see the Sex Pistols. I was so disappointed. But since we're talking, so one of the things about looking back at punk in the 70s and 80s is, of course, looking at style, and we kind of look back at how we looked at our youth. So I thought I'd give you just an idea of for me, so using myself as an example of me in the 80s. So... and this was the era of the photo booth too, right? So up at the top, the first one is from the Del Mar Fair, and then the next black and white ones are at the Oceanside bus station, the old Oceanside bus station. And so December 1980, so that was me going back to my senior year in high school, where my very cagey theater teacher, Clayton Leggett, you go to register for class, and he goes, "Was anyone else hurt?" I was like, didn't even get the joke. It was so funny. And then starting to go to Pacific Beach, where they had a color one. And so I would document when I changed my hair and stuff like that. And then all the way down through my dreadlocks, and then in 88 when I cut them off. And so for me, this is sort of like a fun little timeline to go through of that decade. This is a list of all the local record shops that were in San Diego in the late 70s. I'd ask people sort of, where did you find the music? Where did you find the music? How did you discover it? And for most people, it was going to their local record shop, and either finding, sort of like music magazines from New York or LA, or finding these weird records that the person behind the counter was like, here, listen to this. And it's an amazing list, because now I just think how few there are, and that every part of town had a local shop. Down at the bottom, Blue Meanies, that was in El Cajon. Some of the originators of industrial music came from El Cajon. But pretty quickly, people really wanted to not just listen to records from other places, but develop a scene here. And so the first thing they had to do was get people together. So in 1978, this is an example. This was just a little simple 2-page zine by Tom Griswold. And he just has this, everybody, you'll see as we go through, like the editorial statements of zines are very serious. But he put this out because he wanted people to create a scene, and the number one thing about it was phone numbers. That was the zine, because that was what we were trying to do, because you know how spread out San Diego is, right? And it was this attempt to try and get people connected up together. Another zine that did that was Snare. There's a few issues of this, and you'll see the list of bands shift around a little bit. I think Jeff Mitzo might have 3 different bands, and a different one in each issue. And I started getting curious about who might still have the same phone number. And so this is one where he actually is then going, okay, so it gets to this point where there's enough momentum going. He goes, okay, I don't think I need to do this anymore. Everybody's getting together. Really, the first serious music zine in San Diego was Substitute. Jackie Ramirez, who's here today, was one of the editors, along with Tom Griswold. And the photos in there were from Tim Griswold. They were just terrific photos. This is the Zeros standing outside the Balboa Theater. When they're playing Saturday Night Fever. And the poster, which is hard to see at first, but the poster is right on Sunset Strip. And so it's such a great, talk about a snapshot in time and this juxtaposing these different musical styles. This is another image of the Penetrators, another photo by Tim Griswold. You'll see as we go through, though, there's some great photography has been done through the years in San Diego to document this. So again, that's another angle, right? That people were inspired to create new styles of photography. And as I was saying, you know, there weren't a lot of divisions. There were sort of faux divisions at the time, you know, mods and punks. It was a bit of a joke because everybody still everybody is interacting. I think Chris Jarhead designed the quiz called Punk or Poser that's in here, so you could decide, it's a multiple choice quiz that you would take. But again, one of these comments, which is, you know, people are trying to get things going in town. So, of course, these are some 45s that were put out early on, and so that was one of the big things, which is to start doing recordings, and that, you know, and at the time they're mostly vinyl. Cassettes tended to be more demos. People didn't necessarily put out cassettes as like the official thing. It was like the in-between thing you do, and then you do vinyl. And this one, so the Penetrators one was $1.99, and the Executives one, that's hand marked. So each one of the covers is hand colored, and that was very typical of the time. And here's and I should mention, so this is the Our Blowout cassette. And Cliff has generously brought some cassettes today. So if people don't have this yet, I have it somewhere in my house, I don't know where. But if you didn't keep yours, if you weren't around back in 1983, you today. And it's such a great list of bands, this compilation. And so again, you can see the kind of handmade style, right? So they aren't paying a bunch of money to have something designed, but it's doing it yourself and creating this you know, typewriter plus handwritten kind of style of cover. So one other thing, you know, this slide is kind of an intersection of you know, serious photography and snapshots. The photographer Harold G is an incredible photographer. He took so many photos of in downtown San Diego pre-Horton Plaza. When there was still a lot of artists living down there was a lot of activity, creative activity being done because it was still so cheap down there. And it's such a great, so I just had grabbed a couple of them. The one in the upper right it's okay, it's not the most fascinating photo, but the story is kind of hilarious. They kept getting hassled so much by cops. They decided they discovered in Mission Valley there was a section where there was like an island in the river part, in the San Diego River, so they literally like took a boat and rowed to this island to drink, so that the cops wouldn't bother them. And I just thought that was the best story. And then we have the Clash Brothers. We have Paul Lima from Skullbusters, who was like 12. Yeah, I think maybe even younger than that. Yeah, so he was a great kid lead singer. And then Lloyd, who's no longer with us. And so it's a nice, I know people have a lot of snapshots, and I gotta say, that's one of those things that I think brings out a lot of stories for people. And I'll talk a little bit more about this idea of stories later on. So one of the things that I think makes San Diego very unique in terms of punk art is that we had some amazing artists in our scene in San Diego. And you'll see some incredible work and the styles of flyers that you don't see in other cities. Bobby Lane was one of those people, and I just grabbed chose two to show today, of making these amazing artworks for flyers. And I know these are ones that people kept because people recognized that this was art, and so they hung on to these. Another person was Mark Rude, and doing these amazingly detailed flyers. And so we had some other fun, and that's the thing is I have those 2 full notebooks up there that are what I've cataloged so far of my own collection, which is about 380 flyers so far. And that doesn't count half sheets, quarter sheets, because any of the small stuff I haven't even gotten to yet. And so one of the things that got me started on taking this archive more seriously is I re-sleeved all my stuff because I had been storing it all this time, and I lived near the beach, and I was like, oh my God, right? I've got to do something with this. So that flyer collection is the heart of the start of this archive. And the thing about flyers is people have stories about the shows. So you have this artwork, but then when people look at it, they go, oh, I remember that show. Oh, and then they go on to a story about it. And it really rounds out, I think, the history of the event, right? That the history isn't just recorded with this object. And people have often asked, like, what made you start doing this? What made you want to do a San Diego punk archive? And to be honest, it was because people were dying. And that meant their stories died with them. And I felt a real urgency, to record this stuff and collect it and have it go into an institution where it was taken seriously as it should be. Here's a couple other flyers that are a little more typical. The antipasti one's kind of funny because it explains antipasti. It was sort of like, for those of you who aren't familiar with antipasti, and they describe the band on the flyer, which I really loved. And so when you look through those, there's just so many different styles, and this cut and paste is sort of more typical. Mainstream media was generally, they always were very melodramatic in how they covered punk. And so this is from the local paper at the time, and at least they went to North County too. So there's an interesting mix of this photo on the left, that's up in Leucadia, and then we have the photo on the right, that's San Diego. So they kind of at least mixed that up in the picture of Paul there, where he talks about it's Halloween, 24 hours a day. And slam dancing, it gets out your aggressions. That's what they pull out for the headline, right? And that was very, very typical. And that's why I think, not just for the music, but for other aspects of the scene, this is why punks did zines in a big way. I'm going to show you some different, so I have several slides of zines because I've done this talk in this iteration. Since I do work in zines, that was another real core part of the archive that I was initially really documenting. And so there's definitely issues that come up all the time. If you want to do research, if you were going to write a history of San Diego in terms of the police or something, you had better not skip punk zines, because they have so many discussions about the police and how people were treated if they were underage and things like that. But also you'll see this issue of mutual aid and mutual support. So this talk about everybody doing their part is also a recurring theme. And also there's a lot of stuff where people complain about the scene and then apologize for complaining about the scene, or they'll have letters to the editor arguing about how you feel about the scene or your judgment about who did what. So there's so much narrative. There's so many stories in these zines where they're really talking about how punk fit into the larger culture of San Diego, and what people were doing about it. Scene reports, obviously, super important. My favorite scene reporter has got to be Terry Marine. His zine, Be My Friend, he'd be at every show with his Instamatic camera, taking photos and documenting the show, talking about whether the cops came or not. But also, too, he'd go see mod bands, and Diamanda Galas is on this scene report page. And this is the thing, is avant-garde music was not that far away from punk rock. The people were all mingling together. I actually have some flyers of shows from Philip Dimitri Galassa's performances at Sushi, and Diamanda didn't even have those. I sent her some photos of those. And it's that the art scene and the punk scene very, very tightly wound up together. Here's an example of a show where it has, so it's the benefit, but it has this sort of narrative about before the show and the debut of the Skullbusters. But this thing of like the cops driving up and like talking on the radio about whether they should do something about it. Yeah. And so these are honestly great documents. They're so thorough. This was, let's see, I'm trying to remember who wrote this. But this was so great. This a message from a miner, and they're talking about the fascist police, and because it really used to be a problem. It was so. We always joke the police department had the best flyer collection in town because they knew where everything was happening, and they would show up and they'd be like, "Okay, it's midnight. Your permit's no good anymore. Everybody out." All sorts of crazy tricks. But again, the zines were providing a place for people to write about this and have a discussion about all this stuff. And as we move up through the 80s, so now we're in 84, and then you start seeing where they're talking about other zines. So this is kind of new, where they're starting to look at the other media, the other DIY media, and kind of commenting on that. Now, the other thing that my collection is very weak on is stuff from Tijuana. But the Tijuana scene was so vibrant. And this is, so first you're seeing this thing where it's sort of a conversation about going to Tijuana for a show and some American bands, mostly American bands playing down there. But then pretty quickly too, here's one where it's a scene report from Tijuana. And this is something that later on, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of cross-border stuff where bands were playing in Tijuana a lot more, and there was a lot of action going on. And I think that's something that's something I don't have enough material on that I'd like to expand on, because I know it was such an important part of the scene. And then later you'll see some more overtly political stuff coming around too. So it wasn't just let's all have fun, but looking at the greater issues. And this is because when Reagan was reelected is when this really started. So more political action stuff was happening. Daily Impulse was one that was very much about that, but still talking about doing scene reports and doing music-oriented stuff. My favorite was the Cheap Eats column. The very first one they did was about the chicken pie shop. Yeah. So one of the ways that that political stuff started coming around too, and this sort of blending of, having a good time but also being aware of some of this stuff, was this is the Pink Panthers' first Halloween ball. There was a fundraiser for Amnesty International. And these continue for several years, but the booklet is the notes for all the people working on the project. It's a kind of amazing document. It's not very dry. It's like a narrative. There's like a little story about how they decided to do it and why they picked Amnesty International, who's going to do what on the project. But there's still a lot of story in that. And then what I did for that event was the photos. So we had this set. We made this set. There's this little dragon hanging from the branch that I made out of paper mache, and I still have that. And so we have Lizard and her alter ego Eva Evil for Halloween, and then I'm on the other photo wearing a dress that she customized for me to match my hair, of course. But there's I know there were so many people involved in this event over time that there is a lot of great stories about how all these people who did creative work in other areas came together to put this event on, and use their skills for this fundraising event. And then here I have some pictures. So sometimes too, things were starting to shift a little bit where we have some more comic style illustrations for publications going on. So they're doing music, but there's a lot more illustration heavy. And then this one is great because it's super, super DIY in that every item is hand colored. Every copy is, slightly different hand coloring going on. People are interviewing each other, so this person in this band's interviewing somebody in the other band. So it's not top down, right? Everybody's shifting back and forth and that sort of thing. This is a great page that is about, it's sort of a manifesto about ignoring mainstream fashion and doing your own thing. And it's such a great, it's sort of like this, rallying the troops to go thrift shop and make your own clothes. And so one of the people who even went farther than that was Liz Ard, and she studied fashion. She even learned how to make shoes, and she was her craft was really good, and she was making very distinctive clothing. She opened a shop on Lincoln and 30th called Lizard's Cage, and was so, she was one of those people who took this outsider status where she was so distinctive looking, like there's no missing her. She had no apologies about standing out. But she turned it into she had a small business, right? And another thing that was funny is, so a couple of these color photos, like this great one of Thalia in the middle, we were up in Escondido at the time, New Mall in Escondido, and they were doing a hair show. So we had Julie Z doing the hair and the airbrush makeup and everything. So we decided to take a few photos around since we were there and everybody was dolled up. Within about 15 minutes, the security came and said, "We've already called the sheriffs. If you don't get off the property in 15 minutes, by the time they get here, you're going to be arrested." Which meant, okay, our cars are on the property, so I don't know we don't care. You need to be out on the street by the time they get here. And so it's interesting that even something where that we were seen as a threat to the mall for some reason. And I got to say that's probably so. I think that's something that's really changed for people who might be visually seen as punks. That at the time, it was actually dangerous to look like that. And not just in those kind of scenes, but in, people driving by in their 4x trucks, yelling at you and stuff. And when I was in high school, people threw food at me in school. And then a couple of years later, one of those people tried to be like, hey, how's it going? And now that punk was okay, and I was like, no. So here's an example of a sample of the variety of material around a topic also. So we're here at the end of the 80s with the band Pitchfork from my hometown of Encinitas. And I happen to have some of this stuff because I did the band photos for them and a photo that was used on the 45. So I have, for example, there's the contact sheets, a couple flyers. These two flyers are for the same show. One of their T-shirts. This thing here, this little plastic thing where you're like, what the heck is that? That was how I made the picture that say Pitchfork, right? You shoot you put the plastic over there, you write on it, and the good old chemical days of photography. But this is an example of how there's a lot of different elements around one band, and how you can shift the material in an archive in a lot of different ways. Probably one of the best things about punk was the friendships. That might have been why my parents were, people came over looking crazy. They were totally nice, and I kind of feel like maybe they were just thrilled I had friends. So a lot of us, I think, had that experience where we weren't outsiders anymore. We finally had a tribe. And the tribe has endured. Carol here in the black, I just saw her Saturday night. We were actually, and that's how I had these photos, because we were talking about those. And that's, again, these snapshots where people, so I asked her, Emerald, what is that? She goes, oh, it's Emerald Liquor. So Louis Mello, who's in the back, worked there at the liquor store. That's the kind of friend to have. But the snapshots bring back a lot of stories that aren't just about, the personal relationships are one thing, but also where we were in context to the mainstream culture and that sort of thing. And also, unfortunately, it was the era of the Instamatic camera that did not take great photos, but it's all right. So this was some photos of mine. I didn't take them all. I think I handed my camera around to people all the time. So this is from North Park Lions Club, and also a few from Kings Road of different folks. And then this is from the 4th of July show that we did in 1982. We thought, there's no way the cops are going to break this show up. We're out in the middle of nowhere. And they can't, so you drive out where Torrey Pines High School is, and there used to be nothing out there. You could just keep driving until you're sort of out, and then you see the houses of the east, like off the 15, like way, way over there. So you're like, all right, this is good. The cops came from the east side and drove, and like, we got a complaint. We're like, it's the middle of the day on 4th of July. What do you mean you got a complaint? So things got kind of interrupted, but it was really, really memorable day. Like, going to all the trouble to get all the bands out there and drive out and and put on this show out in the fields is one of those really memorable days. So the friendships, one of the ways friendships have kind of continued and even strengthened nowadays is because of Facebook. It's a way for us to stay in touch. But one of the things I want to talk about a little bit is this idea that people kind of use Facebook like an archive. They post their stories, they post their photos, but it is totally unreliable, right? This is a little shot from the SD Punks group, which, if you notice, so if you've applied and not gotten in, notice the description. If you don't know where it is, you're not invited. Mark Rude actually said that to me and Tammy when we were at Fairmont Hall, and you're like, oh, party at the Mod House. And we run up, and we're like, where is it? And he looked at us, and goes back to me and goes, if you don't know where it is, you're not invited. We found it anyway. You can drive down First Avenue and just look for the Punks. But, so we have a list of bands, and people post here a lot. And one of the reasons people post a lot of stories is because it's kind of closed up, right? Like, it's a little private. Did you know anybody? Are you friends with people? But again, it's this idea of like, it's a good, friendly place to share stuff. But my goal with this archive is to pull that energy and put it out into a real archive. One of the things that you can find there have been some cool documents that have been put together of where some punk landmarks, like putting on the map venues, and then it even includes which ones are still there and which aren't. And then I posted, so for example, I posted this flyer about a fundraiser that happened in Tijuana because I knew people would have stories about it, right? So I knew by posting that I would have stories. But again, I can't really use those stories unless each person gives me permission to collect the story, right? Because they're putting it into this community space. Here are some photos that I did pull from that group because they're performance photos, so I felt that was okay to do for presentation purposes. These are not part of the archive, right? I don't have copies of these. I don't consider this part of the archive. This is an example for me to talk about, right? So it's important to understand that difference. Like, I don't feel comfortable just basically stealing material without permission, especially stories, right? But this was a really signature event that people definitely, that needs to be documented properly. And so for me, that is that goal of collecting things and doing proper documentation. I have a website. Right at this point, the website itself doesn't have a lot. There are a few links there. So for example, zines that I've put up on Flickr so that you can read them there, right? Because you can't, that's why everything's in plastic. It's too delicate to handle. And so I got a great donation from somebody of a scanner that can do almost anything I have. So I could scan those in a format that we could really read and be able to use in an online way. So that's digital aspect of the archive is something that absolutely could be expanded on. I post a lot on Instagram while I'm working on it. It's usually Fridays on my day off because I'm just volunteering my time for this. So on my day off, I sit down and try and catalog some stuff. And so I often take some photos as I'm going through. I've also used that method when I need help identifying stuff or getting the date right. And so this is, this is the, it's not fancy, right? I got my scanner, I've got my boxes of stuff, and this is, the kind of thing that just gets set up, and I have my pile of things that I'm going through, things that I haven't done yet, trying my best to keep it organized. And this is the part where you go, oh my God, what is that? It looks like an Excel sheet. And I'm like, it is. This is the boring part that's so important. And this is the thing that catalogers do. But because it's so important for me that this archive be used and useful and accessible is I'm pre-cataloging everything, right? So, because I know how underfunded everybody is, right? The schools and the institutions, they don't have a bunch of staff ready to take up a project like this. But also too, in some cases, I'm a better person to do it because I actually know more about the material, right? And I can add stuff to it. So up at the top in the zines one, I'm trying to get all the information about who did it, how big it is, all the bands that are mentioned in it, things like that, so that that would be a searchable database, right? So if somebody's looking at Battalion Saints, they could come up with everything where they're mentioned. And then for the flyers, it's that same kind of thing. You'll see some of these that only have a year, and that's because some events were ongoing. I have some that are in brackets, so sometimes I'll have the illustrator in brackets, for example, and that means, well, somebody told me that's who made it, but I don't know for sure. So this is what happened. So all the flyers, those 2 notebooks, those have all been cataloged like this. With the goal, so the goal is then it's useful. It's not just a pile of stuff that looks cool and you can look through, but that it's actually a useful material. So this is the Flickr page where the album where I have the zines that are scanned. There's very few. I mean, there's a bunch of zines that haven't been scanned yet because that's actually really time consuming. Scanning them, reading them, to write down all the material is definitely a job. So my goals, I gotta say the 2 years is probably unrealistic. That's a very short period of time, I'm realizing. But so my goal is that I have an archive that's cataloged, that's got all these different kinds of material in them, and obviously could be added to later. one of the things I would really like to do is audio recordings of the stories that go with the material. A public online collection, sort of just even something like Flickr, but coming up with something that you can use online. And for me, nobody's done a book yet. And we know if San Pedro can have a book, San Diego can have a book, right? Not Disney San Pedro, but I'm just saying. Like, I saw that, and I have that book, and I'm like, okay, all right, we got to pull this together, people. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. I mean, we all talk about it, and I just decided to do it. So one of these things that you can see that I'm talking about is this idea of crowd archiving, which is instead of just one person being that point of reference and that contact, that getting other people involved. And so there's different ideas of how you could do that. I mean, scanning parties has been one of those things that I've thought about doing. Because honestly, it's more fun when you do it together. Just don't spill the beer on the stuff is the one rule, right? Beers have to be on another table. Fundraising would be great. The material, I mean, you wouldn't believe how much the slip pages cost when you are buying like a couple hundred at a time. It adds up. But also storytelling events. There was just one Sunday up in LA where people from the scene so they're on stage and they called it War Stories. So they're telling stories about the good old days of punk. And the how-to zines, what's interesting is there's one from UCLA that the UCLA Punk Archive put together a little zine on how to take care of your own personal collection. You can find it really easily by just doing a Google search for it. The way they PDF'd it, it doesn't print up like a zine, but all the material's there. And it gives really good advice. The two pieces of advice I would give you especially because when I hear, I think I have some of those out in my shed, out in the backyard. Okay. Try and bring your stuff inside. The closet is the best place. Those shelves up in the top of your closet are the safest place for your paper materials. And the other thing is no cardboard boxes. You know, when Mommy dares her, she's like, no wire hangers. I'm like that about cardboard. No cardboard boxes. Silverfish love cardboard. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's not good. They hate plastic. That's why my flyers are in good condition, because I put them in plastic. Trust me, I have other material. Kim knows, because you're like, oh, wow. And it's just, they've eaten it. So plastic bins and put them in your closet. That alone is going to make a huge difference. I want to mention a website that is interesting that I think could be, that if more people are interested in using it, could turn into something much more active. It's been pretty small, but it's called Scene Roller. My friend Matthew Rothenberg, who is in some bands locally, and a couple other people put together this website that where you can, and San Diego has the most band entries by far. But you go in by band and you see these, so it shows you this little circle, right? So the Nephews, and it shows all the people that were associated with that band. So it has this web that you can move around the website in. So for example, here's a page about a specific show, and it has links to the different bands. It has some photos and a flyer from that show. And so then it shows these connections, right? So you can sort of flip through and get at that different stuff. So this could be a great repository and even a new version of this, but where you could have an online repository where you could have a show. And here's photos, snapshots from the show, and the flyer for the show, links to the information about the band, and you could have audio stories about the show, right? So you could collect all these different kinds of digital media together, and just search through this. So it's like being with people while you're looking at the material is that thing that why it's important to try and gather these stories now. So one of the ways that I just am starting to do it, because there's so many ways you could do it, and you could do video recordings and stuff. I personally think a lot of people get uncomfortable when they're getting videotaped, but audio recording is much more comfortable. And this is actually just an app that I put on my phone. Everybody over the age of 45 will love that when you come up to record, it looks like a cassette deck. And you tap on there on the cassette like you're going to write on the cassette label, and you write a name for this little audio file, and you hit record. And then when you hit done, it lets you save it. You can save it up to the cloud. You can email it to somebody. You can, if you pay a whopping $5, it will transcribe it for you and give you space for notes. So for me, this is the kind of thing you can put on a table between two people, and you can start talking about stuff and record that. And in the notes, you can write down what you're talking, Unfortunately, there's no way to attach a photo right within that. Also, I think that it doesn't, so when you send it to somebody, it just is an audio file. So it's cheap, it's not going to give you the magical, the magical version when you send it to somebody, but it has that audio story. And it's when people are talking that the details come out, the inflection comes out, the emotion comes out. So I thought today, I was like, well, let's just start at the beginning and send me a recording of your punk origin story. I mean, I think that would be a really entertaining start to this audio story thing of, well, how did everybody start with it? Because I know there's a lot of great stories. So this voice recorder and audio editor, when you look it up in the iPhone app section, it has a little thing where it looks like a little cassette. That's the icon. But even if you send it from something else. But this was one that I found that was super, super easy to use. So for me, this talk today was a way to, this is something that some of the people here I've already spoken to about the archive, but it was for me to show a larger audience of people and a wider audience of people of different ages and interests. Some people maybe are completely outside of this scene, and this is all new. But to bring this idea of this archive to a bigger audience in order to build momentum for it. Because it's something that I would love to have help on, right? I need help on it because I only have my stories. And so for me, this would be something that could really enrich the history of the city in a big way. So I think I could take questions, or if people want to look at all the material.
I got a
Yeah.
simple comment. Disco is also competing with this. That at that same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I didn't care, but yes, I knew that. No. Yeah.
But I got my own punk rock stories. Don't worry about it. Maybe I should try to share them.
Uh-huh. No, well, see, that's the thing. And here's the thing about that event in April. That event in April isn't just about this, right? It's about other subcultures. You could have a mod archive. A San Diego mod archive would be awesome. So somebody could start collecting that. Those intersect, which is fine. Lowrider, club cars, car clubs. That's gigantic, right? So also too, if you're thinking about, well, I wasn't really a punk, but I'm into this. So think about that event in April, because our idea isn't that we're going to have academics come and talk to you. Our idea is that we are going to present our stories at this event, personal collections, talking about doing a presentation like this about a subculture you were involved in San Diego. So I want to be sure that everybody understands that it's not an academic event. Yeah?
I'm sorry, I missed, is there a date set yet for that April?
April 20th.
And a venue?
No, well, so here's what we kind of want to do, is the venue there might be a central venue for things like this, but we really want to have satellite things happen that we can then tell everybody about, that we aren't in charge of, right? So History Center isn't in charge of that. I say we because I don't know, I guess I'm an insider now. So that's the thing about setting the date. So for example, shows, bands. Let's have bands play, and have a show that's about because we all love those old timer shows. Yeah.
I'm just curious how many people in the room are from that punk scene of the late 70s, early 80s.
Good question. I'm so excited how many people aren't. To me, that's pretty interesting, right?
Well, I was in England though.
Okay.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Have you thought of putting setting up a StoryCorps booth at the Casbah 30th?
I've been thinking about a StoryCorps booth every time the vinyl swap comes up.
Oh.
Yeah, I would love to. And I've talked to some people in bands. I'm like, how can we do this? How can we have, like, stop by, show me your stuff, let's document, let's tell a story. I've absolutely thought about that. I've just been it's been a crazy year for me, which, no joke. But, so, hopefully, yes, I would love to do that. Yeah?
Yeah, I had a question about when you mentioned about Al Cajon
Mhm.
and industrial.
Yeah.
Could you like elaborate on that? Because those two things don't go together that
I
way.
know, right?
Norman
Um,
Leggio.
What?
Norman Leggio, Psychotic Waltz.
Oh, I don't know that.
He's
See?
the metal, like heavy metal.
Oh.
And he owns the building that used to be Blue Meanie
Yeah.
Records #2.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Number 2, yeah, he has its own
Had you
practice
ever,
studio.
had you ever heard of Non?
Boyd Rice.
Yeah. So, Boyd Rice and Robert Turman.
Boyd Rice, I've heard of.
Yeah, so he's from Oklahoma. He and Robert Turman had the band Non, and then they split, and Robert continued to do industrial music. He's in Oberlin now, in Ohio now. But so yeah, so when you look back at that era, that exact time frame, stuff happening in Europe, there was, and I think it came personally. I think some of that came from the contemporary music being done in academia, right? Filtering out, synthesizers happening. So there's these concurrent things that happen.
Oh, it's amazing to
Yeah.
see. I mean, being my aspect of seeing it from England, you know, and seeing, and even now when I see kids, you know, walking around with, you know, exploited T-shirts and Icons of Filth T-shirts.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up with that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to see kids, young kids, walking around, you know, it's meaning so much for them. Like now, you know. I mean, it's another country.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that music was made for us, really, because it was politically.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was specific to our, you know, the times we grew up. You know, Thatcher, all that, you know, evil. You know, so to see, you know, kids in another country identifying with that, you know, the
Yeah.
message and the power behind it. Still,
There's an
To this day,
amazing punk
amazing.
scene in East LA where they're creating new stuff that's very much like that, very rooted in their community
right?
and their time.
Yeah.
And
It's
it-
from America anyway. It's from America and then it went to England, which the English made.
Oh my God, are we gonna have a
Great.
fight?
I can talk a little bit about the industrial noise.
It is
music.
huge.
There was a scene in San Diego. No, take that back. It's not a scene. There were different individuals making weird noise in their bedrooms, thinking that nobody else in the entire world could possibly be interested in it but themselves. And they would try it out on a few friends, and that idea would be confirmed that it's just me, you know. Then, and that's from about 1975 on. Then 1977 happens, and those people came out of the woodwork and found each other in that scene. That's when
Yeah.
I met Boyd Rice. I was doing noise music myself,
Uh-huh.
and Steve Hitchcock, and people like that were doing similar things.
I love that. Yeah, punk gave you an out, oh my God, there's other people that also are, oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
So I've been able to find, I'm younger than you guys. So I've been able to find social spin, diet tribe, stuff like that. I think you mentioned it, but putting some of these 45s online that like, I'll never be able to get some of the stuff that you have pictures of and
Right.
never hear this music. And I mean, it's San Diego, I want to hear it.
Yeah.
Have you ever?
I put the Standby EP up on SoundCloud because there was nowhere. Yeah. So some people are using SoundCloud. Did I ask permission? No, I just did it. Because I kind of felt like, well, It's Nowhere is one of my favorite records ever. I love that band. And nobody had done it, so I just did it. I think some stuff's been reissued. The Executives came out with it, they reissued theirs.
Injections got reissued.
Oh God, really?
Yeah, injection singles been reissued.
Oh, it's done. What?
Oh, I just wanted to ask.
We can go on talk out there. They need a room.
I just wanted to ask about the Mod House, because I've seen it, you mentioned it a few times. Is that a house or a club or what?
It was a house that a bunch of people lived in.
Oh.
Yeah.
I just went by there the other day. I went back and it looked cool, and I don't know if they're renting the house out or
It survived. It survived punk rock.